Hi, my name is Jamal Robinson, Cloud Solutions Architect. I want to give you an introduction to OpenStack today and cover networking. In our previous videos, we've covered things like compute tasks, like launching VMs and backing them up. We've also covered administration, things like creating a new user or a new project. We now want to cover some of the basics of network functions in OpenStack. Networking in OpenStack is managed by the Neutron project. This enables network connectivity as a service for other OpenStack services such as OpenStack Compute Service, Nova. It also provides an API for users to define networks and attachments into them. Neutron has a pluggable architecture that supports many popular networking vendors and technologies. From the OpenStack wiki page, I can see the different Neutron plugins. If I were to click on one, let's say the Cisco Nexus 1000V, it gives me more details like how to configure and use the plugin. The purpose of these plugins are to add vendor-specific or additional functionalities to Neutron. Let's now log into OpenStack and take a look at networking. I start with my networking tab, and let's click Network Topology. This shows me an overview of networks for my current project, which in this case is the admin project. I have the ability to toggle labels so I can see what the names of the resources are, or toggle or collapse the network so I can see how many VMs I have attached to that network. Also have the ability to drag and move this around in case some name or something is being obstructed. So right now we can see that I have two networks. One network is called Web Server Frontend, the other network is called Internal. Into those networks I have a VM attached. One VM network VM is attached to internal, and then the web VM is attached to the Web Server Frontend network. Web Server Frontend actually has a router, and that router is connecting that network to the public interface. There we go. From this screen, I have the ability to launch another VM, to create another network, or create a router. But let's check out the Networks tab to launch a network from. Clicking into a network gives me additional details. Also gives me the ability to add an additional subnet if I choose. Let's add another network. I start by hitting Create Network and then providing a name for the network. Giving the subnet a name, and then giving it an addressing scheme. We'll use 192.168.3.0/24, giving it an available 256 addresses. For the gateway IP, we could specify the specific IP in the range of addresses that we want to use. If not, this normally defaults to a .1 address. We'll leave that blank. We also have the ability to check enable DHCP and set allocation pools, which of the /24 network, we could specify ranges to use of addresses. So for example, in the 192.168.3.0 address, we could specify only using 3.1 through 3.20. If you highlight the question mark, it gives you an example of the syntax you need to use here. Same thing with DNS name servers. We could specify Google's DNS of 8.8.8.8. And we can also announce additional routes to the host. For now, we'll click Create, and my new network has been successfully created. If I go back to Network Topology, I can see my test network has been created and nothing's attached to it. Let's launch a VM and place it on that network. Under the Networking tab, we want to choose our test network. Then we'll click Launch. We now have the VM running on the test network. Going back to network topology, we can see the test network VM on the test network as we've launched. Let's now launch a VM that has multiple network interface cards, meaning that it can see two networks. Let's use test network and internal. This time we add multiple networks and click Launch. My VM is successfully launched, been given two IP addresses for internal and the test network. Let's go back and check out network topology. We can now see that the dual NIC VM connects to both the test network and the internal network. Now that we've successfully created internal networks and added VMs to it, let's try to create a network that we want to route to the public interface. We'll go back to Networks, create a new network, call it Public Facing, leave the gateway IP blank, and hit Create. Now that we have this public facing network and subnet, we need to route it. I click on the Routers tab and go to Choose to create a new router. I give the router a name and choose to route traffic to the external network. Depending on your OpenStack installation, you may have multiple networks under your external network dropdown. For instance, some vendors give you access to route to their private network. So let's say you're using IBM's OpenStack Cloud. They take advantage of SoftLayer's internal network, which offers various service and access to other VMs and bare metal machines, and they let you route to that internal network. In our case, we just have a public network and we click Create Router. The router has been successfully created. Now let's go into that router. We get the router details, but we want to click on Interface and choose to add an interface, specifically our public-facing subnet. We could specify an IP address here, but we'll let it randomly select one. And choose Add Interface. Now if we go back to our network topology, we should see that our newly created network is routed to the external public network. We can now see that our public-facing network has a router routing it to the external public network. Let's now launch a VM on that. Choosing our public-facing network. Which is now running. We can now see another VM, which is attached to the public-facing network, which is routed to the external public network. This VM now has the ability to be accessed directly from anywhere across the world. The last step is to give another VM a public floating IP so it is addressable to anywhere in the world. To do so, I will click on Compute and go to Access and Security. And under Floating IPs, I would look to allocate a floating IP to the project. After that floating IP has been allocated, I now want to associate that with my VM. So I select the VM from the list. Notice that this is smart enough to know which VMs are routed to the external public network. I choose a port and click Associate. This VM is now accessible from anywhere in the world on the 172.24.4.5 address. If we had a web server running on that VM, you may run into potential issues trying to access it. So it's important to make sure that under security groups, if you're using the default security group, that you've actually enabled web traffic on it, meaning that you've opened up port 80 or 443 to allow access to that VM. So this has been it for our brief introduction of networking in OpenStack. Hope this gives you a better idea of how you can handle networking in OpenStack and some of the features available to you. In the next video, we'd like to cover some of the orchestration capabilities of OpenStack using Heat. Thanks for watching. I hope that this was helpful.